continuing where we stopped previously, looking into the first PHP program, and we want to talk about the comments. How do we comment the PHP code? So, the basics, how do you comment the code? So, PHP comments, the program comments. Why to comment the code? Okay, that is for readability and for understanding the logic by others. Okay, it can also for refreshing and or bug fixes. Okay, we want to update, refresh, etc. All those kind of things. You end up commenting the code. So, commenting the code is a very good practice and it should be followed. And the two ways you can do. One is two continuous slashes like that of C or Perl. The same approach. Two continuous slashes. This is a single line comment. Can only comment one line. Okay. If you want to comment multiple lines, this is the also like the C format to comment multiple lines at the same time. Multiple contiguous lines at the same time. So, this large set of lines, so this is a multi lines. Okay. So, everything that within the start and end. So, this is the start and this is the end. So, everything within this will be taken as the comment, and so the Zend engine will ignore or won't parse the comments. It will ignore or it won't parse the comments. Remember one thing, the HTML comment is in this format with a less than sign, an exclamation, two hyphens and a greater than sign. It will not, this comment approach will not work in PHP. So, if you want to do an HTML comment or something like that, create that, then that has to be within either in this format, the two parallel lines, two parallel slashes, or this slash asterisk format. The HTML tag is not applicable in this. Next major basics is variables. What PHP variables? So, variables are, they can take any value. Variables, they are used for storing values. It can be text strings, it can be numbers, it can be arrays, it can be float values, etc. So, the main aim of a variable is to store a value, something. In a PHP script, when you declare a variable, it can be used over and over again in your script. Once you declare a variable, you can use it until the scope of the variable dies away. So, how long can you use it? Until the scope of the variable dies. Okay. So, we will talk about what is the scope of the variable little later. So, there is typically in two ways. One is a local and there is another one is called as global. You might have studied this local variables and global variables, that is what we have called as a scope. Local variables are typically to a function, is local to a function. So, as soon as you exit out of the function, the scope of the variable goes away. Global is for the entire program. So, until the program execution is terminated, that variable remains in the memory. The critical thing is all variables in the PHP starts with the $sign. So, if I want to create a number variable, typically in C, you create a variable called number and I say it as number equal to 5. Okay, that is doable in C. In PHP, there is a $sign before this. So, it will be $number. So, this is the way. So, this $number will be a integer variable ideally in this regard. So, the correct way of declaring a variable in PHP is $variable name equal to value followed by a semicolon. So, if I say $count equal to 0, if I say that count is a variable, okay, PHP variable, and it is initialized to the value of 0. That is how a variable gets declared in PHP. Now, what are the variable naming rules? There are some things that you cannot keep on writing whatever all nonsenses you want to write. So, there is a few things that you can say. The variable name must start with a letter or an underscore. So, I can write like this $count, this is okay. This is a letter. I can also write it as $_count, this is also possible, it's an underscore. Both of these are allowed. But if I do this $3 count, not allowed. I can only start with either a letter or an underscore. So, start with a letter or an underscore. And then a variable name can only contain alphanumeric characters and underscores, and not in the first position, but you can use numerals also. So, I can create a variable like this, $count, or I can create another variable $count, this is lowercase, is uppercase, both are okay. I can create a variable called $person_3, that's doable. $_person_3, that's possible. So, these both are okay. The numeric value 0 to 9 can only come after the first character, the starting character, letter or an underscore. Then the third part is a variable name should not contain spaces, cannot put spaces in between. That is a no when it comes to a variable name. So, if your variable name is more than one word, it should be separated with an underscore. So, like an example string eg_string, or with capitalization eg string. So, I usually follow the second format because this underscore is difficult. Sometimes you miss the shift key and it becomes a problem. So, you can write something like this eg_string. This is what old usage mostly was. A lot of the people used this. The new usage is eg string. This is uppercase. If I create a variable cow comes home, then I will do it as cow comes home. So, this is one way, or otherwise you can do it as $cow_comes_home. This is also doable. Both of these things are acceptable. But having this underscore is slightly difficult. So, a lot of the time the new ones we separate it with the help of capitalization. So, here are some examples, example code of the variable. So, now what you are going to do is you are creating a file called first.php. The previous example that we have gone through, it is called first.php.html. We created this as an HTML page. Now, we are creating a PHP page, and to do this I suggest that we use PHP Designer 2007 personal. It is a free software IDE, and then type the code in this. So, the first line in this says is PHP. So, this means tells the web server to start parsing. So, then this is a single line comment. It is just a comment. This is a complete PHP program for somebody to read that and understand. Then what you written is echo HTML. So, when the PHP is creating a dynamic HTML, first it will print this HTML. This will be sent to browser. Now, the browser will see, okay, there is an HTML, that means now I have to show HTML. I should be in the way of doing a markup language. Then comes the next one, echo body. So, this is the start of the dynamic HTML at the browser. The browser we begin, and then next one says body. So, there is no header, it is just body. And then you have a variable $txt. This is a variable, PHP variable. And what you are saying is, in that the variable is within double inverted commas, it says hello world, welcome to PHP scripting. So, this anything inverted in it says it is a textual or string type. Okay. So, one thing that you should probably notice by this time is in C, there is a language in C language, we used to do this string txt is equal to hello world, whatever it is. Okay. This is what we used to do in C language. In PHP, we do not need to say PHP does not require the programmer to declare specifically the type of the variable. We do not have to say whether it is a integer, string, float, etc. None of this is required. So, whereas in C it is required, you have to declare what is the type of the variable. So, such languages are called as loosely typed languages, okay, or loosely typed language. So, the typecast, the variable typecasting is not a very strict thing in PHP. So, when the PHP says hello world, welcome to PHP scripting within the two inverted commas, it will know, okay, this guy is putting a string. So, that is it. So, it will declare by itself as a string, and this is the end of PHP line, end of PHP line of code, and this is true for here also, end of PHP line. The semicolon marks the end of the line of the PHP code. Then we say echo text, and we have a comment here, it says print the line of text. So, it will print hello world, welcome to PHP scripting. So, this is a PHP variable and this is a PHP text variable, and you have $num1 and num2. Okay. These are PHP numeric variable. That is what this is. So, 73 and 10 are the two numeric variables that we declared, and then we say $sum is equal to num1 plus num2. So, what it does is just take 73 and 10, it will add and store the value of 83 in the $sum, and then it will print echo the sum of within this. So, first it will print this string, then num. So, it will print as the sum of 73, the num1 will be $num1 will be 73, and then it will print and 10, num2 will be 10 is equal to sum will be 83. So, this whole thing PHP will create for you from this, and then you say echo /body /HTML, that means it is closing the HTML stuff, and then it says this is the end of the, tells the web server to stop PHP parsing. So, that is what the important aspect of this PHP code, and we have now seen how both text and the numeric variable are used in this script. So, as I said earlier, it is a loosely typed language. PHP is a loosely typed language, because in PHP a variable does not need to be declared. You do not have to declare the variable before adding a value to it. So, you can just declare a variable and add a value, and PHP will decide what type it is and will add the typecasting to it. So, there is no need for you to tell PHP which data type the variable is. So, what happens? The PHP automatically converts the variable to the correct data type depending on its value. So, whatever the value you assign. So, if you say $num is equal to 23, then num will be an integer. Okay. It will be typecasted to an integer. If I say become stupid and say $num equal to hello world, then num will become a string type. I will typecast to a string. So, the PHP looking at the value or the data type, the value of the data type, it declares based on this value, it determines the data type of the variable. So, that is why PHP is called as a loosely typed language. In a strongly typed programming language like C, example C, C++, okay, then you can think about as Pascal, all these things. They are all strongly typed programming language. You have to declare or define the type and the name of the variable before using it. So, if it is in C, you will have to say int num, and then you say num is equal to 23. You can do this. Okay. This is C. If I do this int num and I say num equal to hello, C will throw an error. This will give a typecast error. You have used the wrong typecast of the variable. So, this will be given by C in this regard. So, PHP you do not have to worry about, because the language in itself will do whatever is the appropriate typecasting. Now, let us talk about the strings, PHP strings, and the PHP has it's very powerful in managing or using strings, string variables. PHP has a lot of power, and this generates it from the, it's like Perl. Perl also has the same string capability power. So, what are string? String variables are used for values that contain characters. Okay. When you have a large set of characters, you use string variable. So, after we create a string, we can manipulate it in PHP. The same as that of same capability as Perl. So, a string can be used directly in a function or it can be stored in a variable. So, one of the important thing is an operation is called a string concatenation. Concatenation means joining two strings, and that is done with the help of this dot operator. Okay. Dot operator. So, if you look at an example, text1, $text1 is hello world, text2 is have a nice day. Now, what I am doing here is $joined is I am saying text1 dot, then there is a space dot. So, what it does is it does hello world, and to which it will add a space here, okay, a blank space, then it will add have a nice day, hello world exclamation, have a nice day. So, this two variables, this is your text1, $text1, this is your $text2. These two variables are concatenated with a blank space. So, this is your two concatenations, or joining of it, right. And what you do is when you say echo joined, so this whole thing is printed. That is what the one capability of PHP. Now, we can also do other string manipulation, and as I said, PHP has a lot of capabilities of string capabilities like Perl. So, find the length of the string. strlen, string length, is a function that is embedded in PHP. So, if you have a variable called $text, hi, how are you, and then $length is equal to string length text. So, what it does is it takes this text and says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. It even counts the blank space also, and it says, okay, I counted 16, and that value of length gets stored as 16. So, length will be equal to 16, and then echo length. So, it will print the value of 16. It says that the length of the string is there. Or you can also write echo string length. This whole thing, instead of doing it, you can combine it into a single line. Okay. This is shorthanding the code, shorthand of the code. So, you can reduce 3 lines and combine everything into one go, and you get the same result. So, other example is, there is another thing called, another example I am calling it a string pose or string position. So, what the string pose or string position says is that it can find the where particular string is located. So, the $str is a string variable, find the key location, and search variable is the key. So, I am saying that position is equal to string post str search. So, what it does is it will do whether this key where is which position it is. So, it will say okay, here is a string and it will search okay, here is key. So, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9. So, it says from the 10th position onwards the key string is there in the. So, you can say that you count to 10th, the 11th position you can see the keyword key is available. So, this is an example code. Okay. Try it out by yourself and see whether it actually works. All right. So, now comes the basic operators of PHP, the main mathematical operators. So, operators, what do? They are used to operate on values. So, the basic arithmetic operators in PHP is, so if you have multiple values, so addition. So, if you say $num equal to 20, $add equal to 30. So, if I say sum $sum equal to $num plus $add. So, this plus is the addition operator, this is the addition operator. If I say diff is $num minus $add, then that is a subtraction operator. Same way, asterisk is for the multiplication, slash is for the division, percentage or it is called as the modulus, remainder operation. So, this basically says find the remainder. Okay. So, if you say $remainder is equal to 10 mod 2, if you do this, then what is the remainder of 10 divided by 2? So, there is no remainder. If I do 10 mod 3, then the remainder value will be shown as 1. Then increment operator plus plus, that basically is equivalent of saying a is equal to a plus 1. Instead of that, if you say a plus plus, which means it is equivalent to saying that a is equal to a plus 1. So, whenever you have to add 1 or subtract 1, then you can use a plus plus or a minus minus. This looks like a large dash, it is 2 minuses. That is the, so this is 2 dashes like this, minus minus. That is a decrement operator. So, increment or decrement, but remember increment and decrement will only add one value to it, one just individual value. Second set of operators, the assignment operators. So, this is equal to. So, equal to is to basically check whether x equal to y or something, or if we use this assignment operator. So, like $num equal to 65. So, that is the equal to operator. So, take the value of 65 and assign it into the variable $num, right. The plus equal to is the short form of. So, if I say $sum is equal to $sum plus $num. Let us say if I have this, I can always say instead of this I can say it as $sum plus equal to num. I can write this, which is exactly the same, it will give you the same result. So, that is a plus equal to, that is sum is the variable, add some value with the same variable. Minus equal to is exactly the same, but instead of the sum it will be subtraction. Star equal to is the product, slash is equal to is the division, dot equal to is equal to x is equal to x dot y, the concatenation, that also is doable. And then modulus equal to, this is also applicable with PHP. Then these are the assignment operators. Now comes the logical operators. So, if you want to say and, okay, and, and, which means condition 1 and condition 2. If you have two conditions to be satisfied simultaneously, okay, satisfy simultaneously, that is the case, then this and is represented by PHP with two ampersand signs. That is a logical and. That means it's both the clauses are correct. The or is given by two vertical bars, or and is to this one, or is two vertical bars. The vertical bars are on the keyboard right above the enter next to the curly braces, and the not that is denoted by exclamation mark, okay, exclamation mark is a logical not x equal to y. So, you are basically saying that if x and y are not equal, then that is what it is. Okay. Now, the third one is comparison operators. So, we have seen is arithmetic operators is one thing we have seen, then we have assignment operators, we have logical operators, and the third set of operators is comparison operators. So, if you say x is equal to y, if you do this checks, it gives you true or false. So, if I say $x is equal to 9, $y is equal to 15. If you say $x is equal to $y, the answer here will be false, because x and y are not exactly the same. But if I say $x not equal to $y, the answer here will be false, here the answer will be true, because x and y are not equal, same thing. Then if I say $x greater than $y in this case, which is 9, is 9 greater than 15? The answer is no, it is not true, so it is false. If I do this $x less than $y, it will be true. Okay. So, that is the other aspect of this one. Then the greater than or equal to or less than or equal to is another condition. So, if you say that in a loop condition or something, we use it to check the is it value is less than or greater than, that is useful. So, then other aspect is PHP has lot of conditional statements. Conditional statements or the statements that are used to perform different actions based on different conditions. So, you want the code to do or the program to follow different logic. Okay. This actions means follow different logical paths based on certain conditions. So, the following conditional statements exist in PHP. The number one is called as the if statement. So, if you write someplace if statement and then you give a set of stuff here. So, then if this statement is true, only then these conditions will be executed, otherwise it will not execute. So, then another one is if else statement. So, this statement is the if statement is only used to execute some code if a specific condition is true, that is it. The condition is true, do this, otherwise do not do anything. If else statement is this is particularly used some code if a condition is true and execute another code if the condition is false. So, there is a scenario where something is true, then you have to do a logic. If it is not true, then you have to do some other logic, then you use if else statement. Then the third one is if else if. So, you can think about it as if statement, if this is true, do this, else if statement, okay, then it is true, do this, else do this. So, you can have large set of statements based on this use else if usages. So, use a statement to select one of the several blocks of code to be executed. So, based on multiple conditions that is feasible, that you can do, but this is not very popular among programmers. People does not use it too much. Now, the last statement is a switch statement. Okay. So, switch statement is when you have to select one of the many blocks of code to be executed. So, instead of else if, lot of the people actually prefer switch statement. So, I will show you an example of each one of these in the following slides. So, that would actually make your life much more easy. So, let us look at the if and else if statement. How do we code that in PHP? So, the simple example of PHP. So, here is the start PHP parsing. Okay. So, the send engine will start parsing it. So, there is a function in PHP called date. Okay. So, the date function of PHP, if you say date d, okay. So, what it does is it basically takes current date, then it checks for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday or Sunday, the 3-letter abbreviation, and then whatever it is, and then returns it, the current day is. So, then we say if $day is equal to Friday. If the value that it returns is Friday, then you should print enjoy your weekend. Otherwise, do nothing. Okay. So, this is the do something only when true. So, print enjoy your weekend only when it is a Friday. Otherwise, do not do anything. An if else example is this. Again, the same date function. If day is equal to Friday, this is equal to, if the value of $day is equal to Friday, enjoy your weekend this much. So, this is do when the day of week is Friday. When it returns Friday, print this. Else, in all other cases, this is all otherwise. In all other cases, print have a great day, do your job. But you can also see that I can also embed tags in the HTML tags here. This is a line break. Okay, this is line break. Here is bold. Okay, here is heading 2, etc. Then this /n is a new line, prints the next sentence in the new line. That is the idea. So, all of this, and then the PHP parsing gets stopped here. Then if else if, I told you, if condition is true, else if this code to be executed if this if condition is true, else the code to be in this if this particular if is false, etc., like that. In many cases, the if else could be better replaced by switch statement. Okay. So, that I mentioned, this is not very popular approach to do it. Okay. It can be confusing. Okay. Can be confusing at the beginning. Okay. So, hence it is probably better for you to use the switch statement. So, what is a switch statement? So, the switch statement is you use it when you have to select one of the many blocks of code to be executed. When you have multiple blocks of code to be executed and you have to select only one. Okay. So, that is what it is. So, you give a switch n, this is the criteria of switching. Okay. This is the value, okay, of the label. Okay. And if the value of the label is label 1, label 2, etc., okay, so then it will execute the value. If the value of n is equal to label 1, it will execute this particular block of code. If value of n is equal to label 1, this is if n is equal to label 2. If this is not true, then execute default. There is a default clause. If none of the label cases are true, then just do the default code. So, that is the switch statement. We also now, without going into too much of examples, because you can see too many examples coming up, we now go into what we call as an arrays, PHP arrays. So, array is a special variable. So, what is an array? Like in all programming languages, array is also available in PHP. Okay. The advantage of the array is that it is a special variable which can store multiple values in one single variable. So, let us say you have 10 students in a class, 10 students in a class. You want to store the age of all 10 in a single variable. Okay. Use a numeric array of size 10 to do so. So, that is what an array. In a single variable, you can store multiple values. So, array can hold all your variable values under a single name and access the value by referring to the array name. And in PHP, there is 3 types of arrays. A numeric array, number 1, very popular, which can holds a numeric value, and it has a numeric index rather than numeric value. Associative array, second one, where each ID, there is a key associated with a particular value, and it is very popular with queries. When you deal with the DBMS, associative array is very popular with this. And then multi-dimensional arrays, okay, array containing more than one other array. So, here is an example of numeric array. A numeric array stores each array element with a numeric index. It does not have to be numeric value, but the index is numeric. And the 2 methods to create a numeric array. if indexes are automatically assigned, you don't have to give the index, it starts at 0. So if we say $names equal to array John, Mary, Jack, Jill, Todd, then it will have $names 0 will be John, okay, $names 1 will be Mary, okay, etc. and $names 2, names 3, names 4, names 5, okay, 5 will be Ram. Remember, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but this index is 5. The reason is because the index starts at 0, default index starts at 0. So, it will always be, the last will be stored with one value less than this. You can also assign it manually. This is another one, car 0, car so. So, if I say print or echo cars 2, it will print Toyota. That's what will happen in this case. Then comes what you call as an associative array in PHP. An associative array is powerful purely because of the fact that when storing data about the specific named values, a numeric array is not always the best way to do it. Because why? You need to remember what is the index. So, if I want to know what is Toyota, I need to remember cars 2 is Toyota. But to solve this problem, if you use an associative array, each ID key is associated with a value. For example, if you want to store the age of the people, so then I can basically say that $age, I say that array John 30, Mary, if you use this part, if I use this, then what I can say is that instead of declaring $age 0 and remembering it as John, I can say $age John, single quote. If I do this, then it will return the value of 30. So, in such type of arrays, instead of using a numeric value as index, you can use a key. So, this is the key. Okay. Such kind of an array is known as associative array, okay, and it is very, very popular when SQL results, because almost all SQL query results are stored as associative array in PHP. Okay. So, you can use an associative array mechanism to actually access the content of the SQL query that is returned to you in PHP. Okay. And then the last one is a multi-dimensional array. Okay. In a multi-dimensional array, each element in the main array can also be an array. The idea is that there is another array within an array, and each element in the subarray can also be an array, and so on. So, it is complicated, but you can create a family array, for example. So, in families, there is an array of Gupta. So, the Gupta family is Raju, Sita and Payal. So, there is a Raju Gupta, Sita Gupta and Payal Gupta. So, that is one array. So, the families is an array in which the first array, let us call it as family 0. Okay. It has another array which is family zeros, and you can call it as a 0 Gupta array. Okay. And that is the Raju, Sita, Payal. So, that is 0 Gupta 0 will be Raju, 0 Gupta 1 will be Sita, 0 Gupta 2 will be Payal. And same way there is a family is 1, actually family is 1, 0, there is a Singh also here. Okay. And there is only one, the Shanti. And then there is a third one which is called as Brown. Okay. So, you can have multi-dimensional arrays on this. Multi-dimensional arrays, I would request you guys to get into it once you become very, very confident with the associative arrays. Only then get into this, otherwise it can be slightly confusing for you. Okay. So, with this we actually come to the end of the initial exposure to PHP and quick upgrade of exposure to what PHP is all about. I recommend you guys to go to W3 Schools, as I mentioned at the beginning of the course, and look at the PHP tutorial. It is a very quick way for you to quickly try and learn PHP without actually having a PHP installed on your computer. Okay. So, W3 Schools is once more recommended for the PHP tutorial, and please go through it, and we will so I am leaving the rest of the stuff for you guys to read, learn, practice, and then we will now quickly see how to capture the forms from the data from the forms using PHP, or how to integrate HTML form and PHP together, and then how to integrate a DBMS with PHP together, and then tie it up all as part of the course at this point. Okay. So, thank you very much for your patient listening, and we will continue it in the next class. Thank you.